Rain streaked down the window like tears. The universe cried on her behalf. Natalia Rivera sat cross-legged on her apartment floor, surrounded by envelopes that held her life hostage. Each one screamed a different shade of red. Overdue, final notice, collections. At 29, she had imagined her life differently. The graphic design degree gathering dust on her wall promised creativity and freedom. It's not this suffocating cage of debt that tightened around her chest with every breath. Her phone buzzed against the hardwood floor, dancing slightly with each vibration. Unknown number. Natalia almost ignored it. Creditors had become her most frequent callers, their voices a monotonous soundtrack to her anxiety. But something made her answer. "Miss Rivera?" The voice belonged to a woman, crisp and professional. "My name is Patricia Holmes. I represent a client who wishes to discuss a unique business proposition with you." Natalia's guard went up immediately. "I'm not interested in pyramid schemes or credit consolidation scams." A soft laugh echoed through the speaker. "Nothing of the sort. My client is willing to compensate you $1 million for 6 months of your time. This is a legitimate offer, Miss Rivera. All I ask is that you meet with him tomorrow at Café Bellissimo at 2 in the afternoon. He'll explain everything." The line went dead before Natalia could respond. She stared at her phone, heart hammering. $1 million. The number echoed in her mind like a prayer and a curse. It was enough to erase every debt, to start fresh, to breathe again. It was also too good to be true. That night, sleep eluded her. She researched Café Bellissimo, a place so expensive it required reservations months in advance. She Googled every scam variation she could think of. Nothing made sense. At 1:45 the next afternoon, wearing the only professional outfit she owned, a navy blazer with matching pants that had seen better days, Natalia stood outside the cafe. Her reflection in the polished glass door showed a woman trying desperately to look confident while falling apart inside. He was already there. She knew it was him before anyone said a word. He sat at a corner table, posture perfect, suit tailored so precisely it looked painted on. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have graced magazine covers, but it was his eyes that stopped her. Gray, like storm clouds, holding depths of something she couldn't quite name. Exhaustion, maybe. Or loneliness. "Miss Rivera." He stood as she approached, extending his hand. "Damien Blackwood. Thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, warm, real. Natalia slid into the chair across from him, hyper-aware of the opulence surrounding her. Crystal glasses, imported flowers in the centerpiece, the subtle scent of old money and privilege. "I'll be direct," Damien said, folding his hands on the table. "I need a wife for 6 months, and I'm prepared to pay you $1 million to fulfill that role." The words hung in the air between them. Natalia's first instinct was to laugh, then run, then maybe laugh again. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why me? You're not connected to my world. You have no social media presence linking you to anyone in my circles. You're educated, articulate, and most importantly, you need the money badly enough that you'll take this seriously." He delivered each reason like items on a grocery list, clinical and detached. "That's incredibly invasive. You investigated me?" "Thoroughly." No apology in his voice. "This isn't a decision I make lightly." Natalia leaned back, studying him. Behind the confident exterior, she detected cracks. The way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking. The finger that tapped against his thigh, a nervous tell he probably didn't realize he had. "Why do you need a fake wife?" Damien's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his features before he locked it down. "My grandfather is dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He has one wish before he goes, to see me married and settled. He's the only family member who ever gave a damn about me, and I refuse to let him die disappointed." The raw honesty in those words cut through Natalia's skepticism. She understood family obligation, understood the desperate need to protect the people you loved. Her own mother's medical bills were half the reason she sat drowning in debt. "So you want me to pretend to be in love with you? Attend family dinners, play house, all for show." "Exactly. Separate bedrooms, no physical requirements beyond what's needed for appearance. You'd live in my home, attend necessary events, and after 6 months, we divorce amicably. The money is yours regardless of the outcome, protected by contract. Contract? Natalia raised an eyebrow. Damien produced a leather portfolio from beside his chair, sliding it across the table. The document inside was impressively thick, legal language dense on every page. Everything is outlined here. You can take it home, have a lawyer review it, take your time. But time was a luxury Natalia didn't have. The eviction notice taped to her door gave her 72 hours. Her mother's next surgery was scheduled for next month, already postponed twice because they couldn't afford it. 6 months of her life for financial freedom. It seemed almost too simple. Where do I sign? Damien blinked, surprise breaking through his composure. You don't want to read it first? Natalia thought about the stack of red envelopes waiting at home, about her mother's tired face when she tried to hide pain, about the crushing weight of starting each day, already defeated. Show me where. He produced an expensive pen pointing to highlighted sections throughout the document. Natalia signed her name 15 times, each signature feeling like a small death and a rebirth simultaneously. She didn't read the clauses about asset division or public appearance requirements. She definitely didn't see the paragraph on page 34, the one buried between legal jargon about property rights and confidentiality agreements. The clause that would change everything. When she finished, Damien extended his hand again. Welcome to the Blackwood family, Mrs. Blackwood. The title sent a shiver down her spine. When do I move in? Tomorrow. I'll send a car at 9. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Natalia, I know this is unconventional, but I promise you'll be treated with respect. This is just business. It's just business. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a lie. Neither of them believed yet. That evening, as Natalia packed her meager belongings into 2 suitcases, her phone chimed. Bank notification, deposit received, $1 million. She sat on her bed, staring at the number until it blurred. She paid every bill, every debt, watching balances zero out one by one. When she finally laid down, she clutched the contract to her chest, wondering what she'd really signed away. In the morning, a black car would arrive. In the morning, she would become someone else's wife. In the morning, her life would transform completely. She just didn't know how completely until it was far too late to turn back. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of Blackwood Tower. A glass and steel monument to wealth that pierced the city skyline like a declaration of dominance. Natalia stepped out of the private elevator, her 2 battered suitcases suddenly feeling shameful in the gleaming marble foyer. Everything gleamed. The floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering panoramic city views. Even the air seemed to shimmer with an expensive quality she couldn't name. Welcome home. Damien appeared from an adjoining room, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweater that somehow made him look more intimidating than the suits. Without the armor of formal wear, she could see the athletic build beneath. The way he moved with quiet confidence through his domain. Home. The word felt foreign in her mouth. This wasn't a home. It was a museum, a showpiece, a carefully curated exhibition of success that had nothing to do with warmth or belonging. Your room is down this hall. Damien gestured left, where floor-to-ceiling windows lined a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. I'm on the opposite side. Maximum privacy. There's a housekeeper who comes daily, a chef if you want meals prepared, and a driver available whenever you need to go somewhere. Natalia followed him, her footsteps echoing against marble. The bedroom he showed her was larger than her entire former apartment. A king bed dominated the space, dressed in white linens that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. The attached bathroom featured a soaking tub and a shower with more jets than seemed necessary for basic hygiene. Damien asked, and she detected genuine concern beneath the formal question. It's overwhelming, she answered honestly. I keep waiting for someone to tell me I don't belong here. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. I've felt that way my entire life in this family. You get used to it. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. His expression hardened as he read the message. Family dinner tonight. 7 sharp. My mother insists on meeting you immediately. The way he said mother carried enough ice to freeze the room several degrees. Should I be worried? Terrified would be more appropriate. He wasn't joking. Evelyn Blackwood has made interrogation an art form. She smells weakness like a shark smells blood. That evening, Natalia stood before her new closet, where someone had already unpacked her meager wardrobe. Her clothes looked ridiculous, hanging in the massive space, like orphans in a mansion. She chose a simple black dress, the same one she'd worn to job interviews before the world fell apart. Damien knocked at exactly 6:40. When she opened the door, his expression shifted subtly. "You look beautiful," he said, then seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. "I mean, appropriate." "You look appropriate, smooth." Despite her nerves, Natalia smiled. He offered his arm. "Before we go, there are things you need to know. My mother, Evelyn, she opposed this marriage viciously. She believes I'm making a mistake. My grandfather, Thomas, he's the reason for all of this. He's weak now, but his mind is sharp. He'll be watching us, looking for cracks in our story." Our story being that we met at a charity gala 3 months ago. You've spilled champagne on my jacket. I was charmed by your apology. We've been inseparable since. He recited it like lines from a script. Can you remember that? Champagne, charity, inseparable. Got it. Natalia took a deep breath. Damien, what happens if they don't believe us? He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something raw beneath his controlled exterior. Then my grandfather dies thinking I'm as much of a failure at love as I am at everything else that matters. The vulnerability in those words struck her chest. Before she could respond, the elevator chimed. They descended in silence, tension coiling between them like a living thing. The Blackwood family estate sat in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, behind gates that required 3 security checkpoints. The mansion itself was old money incarnate, brick and ivy. Manicured lawns, fountains that served no purpose except to demonstrate excess. A butler, actual butler, opened the door before they could knock. Master Damien, Mrs. Blackwood. The family awaits in the dining room. Natalia's hand tightened on Damien's arm. He covered it with his own, the gesture surprisingly comforting. We're in this together, he whispered. Just follow my lead. The dining room could have hosted royalty. A table stretched the length of the space, set with china so delicate Natalia feared breathing on it. At the head sat an elderly man, frail and hollow-eyed, oxygen tubes running to his nose. Despite his obvious illness, his gaze was laser-sharp, assessing her with uncomfortable intensity. Grandfather. Damien's voice warmed genuinely for the first time since she'd met him. This is Natalia. So this is the girl who finally captured my grandson's heart. Thomas Blackwood's voice was surprisingly strong. Come closer, child. Let me see you. Natalia approached, feeling like she was being appraised for auction. Thomas reached out a trembling hand, and she took it gently. His skin was paper-thin, spotted with age, but his grip was firm. You have kind eyes, he said softly. That's good. Damien needs kindness. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the moment like a blade. How very touching. Evelyn Blackwood entered like a winter storm, all sharp angles and cold beauty. She was probably in her early 60s, but looked a decade younger. Preserved by money and what Natalia suspected was a talented surgeon. Her dress was designer, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive, her smile predatory. Mother. Damien's arm tensed beneath Natalia's hand. Darling. Evelyn kissed the air near her son's cheek, then turned that calculating gaze on Natalia. So you're the mysterious bride. How delightfully unexpected. Tell me, Natalia, what do you do? I'm a graphic designer. Words came out steadier than she felt. How quaint. And your family? Mother, Damien warned. I'm simply getting to know my new daughter-in-law. Surely that's allowed? Evelyn's smile never reached her eyes. It's just so sudden, this marriage. 3 months of courtship seems rather rushed, doesn't it? One might almost think there was some ulterior motive. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Natalia felt every eye on her, waiting for her to crack, to reveal the truth. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain they could all hear it. Then Damien did something unexpected. He turned to her, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. When you know, you know. The moment Natalia spilled that champagne, I saw my future in her eyes. I wasn't about to waste time with unnecessary conventions. The way he looked at her, God, if she didn't know better, she would have believed him. His thumb brushed her cheek, a gesture so intimate it made her breath catch. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them, and she forgot they were pretending. How romantic, Evelyn said dryly, breaking the spell. Shall we eat? Dinner was an endurance test. Course after course appeared while Evelyn lobbed questions like grenades. Where did Natalia grow up? What did her parents do? Why had she never been married before? Each answer was dissected, analyzed, found wanting in ways both subtle and overt. Through it all, Thomas watched with those sharp eyes, saying little but missing nothing. Natalia caught him studying the way she and Damien interacted, looking for tells, for proof of authenticity. She tried to remember they were supposed to be in love. She laughed at Damien's stories, touched his arm when he spoke, let him refill her wine glass with attentive care. The problem was, some of it stopped feeling like acting. When Damien's hand found hers under the table during his mother's particularly vicious comments, the comfort felt real. When he defended her against Evelyn's subtle insults, the protectiveness in his voice made something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with their contract. After dinner, Thomas requested a private moment with them. They followed him to his study, a room lined with books and smelling of leather and old cigars. He lowered himself into a chair with visible effort, waving away Damien's attempt to help. Sit, he commanded, and they obeyed. Thomas studied them for a long moment, his breathing labored. I'm dying, he said bluntly. We all know it. The doctors give me weeks, maybe a month if I'm stubborn enough. Before I go, I need to know you'll be all right, Damien. You've been alone too long. I'm not alone anymore. Damien's hand found Natalia's again. No, you're not. Thomas smiled, but it was sad. Tell me, how did you really meet? Natalia's blood froze. Beside her, Damien went rigid. Grandfather, I told you the champagne story. Yes, very charming. Also complete fiction. Thomas leaned forward slightly. I've known you your entire life, boy. I can tell when you're lying. What I can't tell is why. The silence was deafening. Natalia's mind raced, searching for explanations, excuses, anything. They'd failed. Less than one day in, and the entire charade was collapsing. Because I was afraid, Damien said quietly, and the raw honesty in his voice made Natalia's head snap toward him. I was afraid that if I brought home someone real, someone I actually cared about, this family would destroy her like they destroy everything good I've ever had. He wasn't looking at his grandfather. He was looking at Natalia, and the pain in his eyes made her heart ache. After Caroline died, I swore I'd never let myself feel that way again. I'd never give anyone that power over me. But then he stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Then I met Natalia, and for the first time in 5 years, I wanted to try. I wanted to believe I could have something real. But I knew you'd have questions. Mother would investigate. Everyone would have opinions. So I lied about how we met because the truth felt too precious to share. Natalia stared at him, completely blindsided. Caroline? Who was Caroline? And the way he spoke, the emotion in his voice, it felt genuine in a way that terrified her. Thomas nodded slowly. Caroline's death wasn't your fault, wasn't it? Bitterness crept into Damien's voice. She was coming to meet me that night. If I hadn't insisted, if I'd just gone to her instead, then the drunk driver might have hit your car instead of hers. Guilt is a heavy burden, but it's not justice, and it's not love. Thomas turned his attention to Natalia. And you, my dear, do you love my grandson? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Natalia opened her mouth, closed it, unsure what truth to tell. She'd signed a contract for money. She'd agreed to pretend. But sitting here, Damien's hand in hers, his pain laid bare, the answer felt more complicated than it had any right to be. I care about him, she said carefully. More than I expected to. It was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said all evening. Thomas studied her face, then smiled slightly. That's a start. Love doesn't always arrive as a lightning bolt. Sometimes it creeps up on you when you're not looking. Don't waste time fighting it, either of you. Time is more precious than you young people realize. They left his study in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of them. In the car ride home, Damien stared out the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Who was Caroline? Natalia finally asked. My fiancée. 5 years ago? His voice was hollow. She died in a car accident. We were supposed to get married the following month. Instead, I buried her. I'm so sorry. Don't be. It's not your burden. But the way he said it suggested it remained very much his burden. Carried alone all these years? Back at the penthouse, they stood awkwardly in the foyer, the evening's intimacy creating a strange tension between them. You were convincing tonight, Damien said. Thank you. So were you. Natalia hesitated. What you said in there about me being too precious to share, was that part of the act? Damien looked at her, really looked, and she saw confusion in his eyes that mirrored her own. I don't know anymore. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into his wing of the penthouse. Natalia stood alone in the massive space, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with their deception. That night, she couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, she wandered to the kitchen for water and found Damien already there. Sitting in darkness at the counter with a glass of whiskey. Can't sleep either? She asked softly. Sleep and I aren't on speaking terms. He gestured to the cabinet. There's wine if you want. Natalia poured herself a glass and sat beside him. They existed in companionable silence for several minutes before he spoke again. Caroline loved champagne. Real champagne, the expensive stuff. She said life was too short for cheap alcohol and fake emotions. He swirled his whiskey. After she died, I couldn't stand anything authentic. Everything real hurt too much. So I built walls, made everything in my life transactional, controllable, including this marriage. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked me an honest question earlier, and you deserve an honest answer. He turned to face her, the dim light casting shadows across his features. What I said about you being too precious to share, it wasn't entirely acting. You're the first person in 5 years who's made me feel something other than numb or angry. That terrifies me. Natalia's breath caught. Damien, we have a contract. This is supposed to be business, I know. His voice dropped lower. But business doesn't explain why I keep wanting to touch you when no one's watching. Why I lied to my grandfather about how we met because I wanted our story to sound romantic. Why the thought of you leaving in 6 months feels he didn't finish. Instead, he leaned closer, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that started tentative and grew desperate. 5 years of loneliness meeting mountains of buried hope. Natalia's hands found his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. It was nothing like the chaste kiss they'd shared for appearance at dinner. This was raw, real, terrifying in its intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back in. This isn't part of the contract, Natalia whispered. No, Damien agreed, his forehead resting against hers. It's not. They stood there, tangled together in the dark kitchen, neither willing to name what was happening between them. Finally, Natalia pulled back, creating necessary distance. I should go to bed. Natalia, good night, Damien. She fled to her room, closing the door and leaning against it, her heart hammering. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was here for money, to save herself, to clear debts, and start fresh. Falling for her fake husband wasn't part of the plan. Unable to calm her racing thoughts, she pulled out the contract, intending to review the terms, to remind herself why she was really here. She flipped through pages mechanically until something on page 34 caught her eye. A clause she hadn't noticed during her rushed signing. Section 12.4. Emotional contingency. Clause should either party develop genuine romantic feelings for the other during the contracted period, as evidenced by mutual acknowledgement or physical intimacy beyond that required for public appearance. This contract shall be considered void in its original terms. All previously agreed upon financial arrangements will be suspended pending renegotiation. The marriage will continue under standard legal marriage statutes until such time as both parties mutually agree to dissolution. Neither party may unilaterally terminate the arrangement without standard divorce proceedings, including potential division of assets acquired during the marriage period. Natalia read it 3 times, her hands trembling. The kiss, the feelings. If Damien had added this clause, if he knew about it, then everything changed. The money wasn't guaranteed anymore. The 6-month timeline was meaningless. They were bound together in ways far more complex than she'd understood. Her phone buzzed. A message from Damien. "We need to talk about tonight." She stared at the screen, then at the contract clause, then back at the screen. Tomorrow she would confront him. Tomorrow she would demand answers about this hidden trap buried in legal language. Tonight, she sat on her bed in a stranger's penthouse, realizing she'd sold 6 months of her life for money that might disappear the moment. She admitted she was falling for a man who'd built walls so high. She wasn't sure either of them could climb them. Outside her window, the city glittered with 1,000 lights, each one representing someone else's story, someone else's dreams and disappointments. Natalia wondered how many of them had gambled everything on a feeling they didn't understand, only to find themselves trapped between what they wanted and what they could afford to want. Her reflection in the dark window looked back at her. A woman caught between 2 worlds, neither of which felt entirely real anymore. 6 months had seemed like nothing when she signed that contract. Now she wasn't sure she'd survive 6 days. Morning arrived with cruel clarity. Natalia sat at the kitchen counter, contract spread before her like evidence at a crime scene. Page 34 glaring up with its perfectly crafted legal trap. She'd been awake all night, reading and rereading the emotional contingency clause, each pass revealing new implications she'd missed before. The elevator chimed. Damien emerged in running clothes, sweat dampening his shirt, earbuds dangling from his neck. He stopped when he saw her, saw the contract, saw her expression. "You found it." Not a question. A statement of inevitability. "You knew." Her voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that precedes storms. "You knew about this clause when you kissed me last night. When you said all those things about feeling something real, you knew." Damien crossed to the coffee maker, his movements deliberate, avoiding her eyes. "Yes, why?" The word came out broken. Was any of it true? Or was this just another layer of manipulation? Get the desperate woman to fall for you. Trap her in a real marriage. What? Some twisted psychological experiment? He spun around, and the pain in his eyes caught her off guard. "You think I wanted this? You think I planned to feel anything for you? I think you added a clause to a contract that protects you if I catch feelings. That sounds pretty calculated to me. I didn't add it." Damien's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "My grandfather did." The room fell silent except for the hiss of the coffee maker. Natalia stared at him, trying to process this new information.
What?
Damien slumped against the counter, suddenly looking exhausted. "When I told Thomas I wanted a contract marriage, he agreed on one condition. That clause. He said if I was going to do something this cynical, there needed to be a consequence for succeeding too well." He thought a bitter laugh escaped him. He thought if we actually fell for each other, we shouldn't be allowed to walk away easily. That real feelings deserved real consequences. Natalia's anger deflated slightly, replaced by confusion. "But you still went along with it. You still let me sign without explaining, because I never thought it would matter?" He finally met her eyes. "I never thought I could feel anything again after Caroline." The clause seemed like insurance against something impossible. "Then you walked into that cafe and what? And everything I thought I knew about myself turned out to be wrong." He moved closer, but didn't touch her. "I'm not manipulating you, Natalia. I'm just as trapped as you are. Maybe more, because I actually let myself hope." She wanted to stay angry, to hold on to righteous fury as a shield against the vulnerability creeping through her chest. But the exhaustion in his voice, the defeat in his posture, spoke to something she understood too well. They were both casualties of this arrangement. Both caught in a web, neither had fully understood when they agreed to spin it. "So what now?" she asked quietly. "We pretend last night didn't happen? Go back to being roommates playing house for your dying grandfather?" "I don't know if I can." Admission seemed to cost him. "I've spent 5 years not feeling, and now I can't seem to stop. You make me want things I thought I'd buried with Caroline. That's not fair. You can't put that on me." "I know. Nothing about this is fair." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "But we're here now, and we have to decide what to do with it." Before Natalia could respond, Damien's phone erupted with shrill ringing. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. "It's the hospice nurse," he answered. And Natalia watched the color drain from his face completely. "We're on our way. What happened?" "My grandfather. He collapsed this morning. They don't think his voice broke. We need to go now." The drive to the Blackwood estate was silent and suffocating. Damien gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white, his jaw clenched against emotions he refused to release. Natalia wanted to comfort him, but their unfinished conversation hung between them like a wall she didn't know how to scale. The mansion buzzed with controlled chaos when they arrived. Nurses moved efficiently through hallways, medical equipment hummed, and in the center of it all, in Thomas's bedroom, the old man lay propped against pillows that seemed to swallow his frail frame. "Damien." His voice was thread-thin. "And Natalia." "Good. I wanted you both here." Evelyn sat in a chair by the window, her usual composure cracked, eyes red-rimmed. She looked at them, and something in her expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, but a reluctant understanding that grief creates strange allies. "Grandfather, save your strength." Damien moved to the bedside, taking Thomas's hand with a tenderness that made Natalia's heart ache. "Strength for what? More breathing?" Thomas managed a weak smile. "No, I need to say this while I still can. Both of you sit." They obeyed, perching on the edge of the bed. Thomas looked at them with those sharp eyes that missed nothing, even now. "I know," he said simply. Damien went rigid. "Know what?" "About the contract. About the arrangement. I've known from the beginning." Natalia felt the floor tilt beneath her. "But you said I said nothing that wasn't true. I asked if you loved my grandson, and you said you cared about him more than you expected. An honest answer to a question I already knew the answer to." He coughed, a wet rattle that spoke of failing lungs. "Did you really think I'd orchestrate my own grandson's marriage without doing my homework? Then why?" Damien's voice was hollow. "Why let us continue the charade?" "Because it stopped being a charade somewhere around the second course at dinner." Thomas squeezed Damien's hand weakly. "I watched you look at her like she was air and you were drowning. I watched her defend you against your mother's barbs without being asked. That's not acting. That's two people falling for each other and being too stubborn to admit it." Natalia and Damien exchanged glances, and in that moment, something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or surrender to a truth they'd been fighting. "That clause I added to your contract," Thomas continued, "it wasn't a trap. It was a gift. Real love doesn't need an exit strategy. It needs courage to stay when things get complicated. You too. You're so busy protecting yourselves from pain that you can't see what's right in front of you." He's right. "You know," everyone turned to Evelyn, who'd been so silent they'd almost forgotten she was there. "I fought against this marriage because I thought you were making another impulsive mistake, Damien. But watching you these past few days," she stood, moving to stand beside the bed. "You're different with her, softer, more like the son I remember before Caroline died." Tears tracked down Damien's face now, no longer contained. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in without being terrified I'll lose them too." "You can't control loss," Thomas said, each word an effort. "You can only control whether you have something worth losing. Natalia, come here." She moved closer, and Thomas took her hand in his other one, linking her and Damien together. "I'm not going to make my deadline to see you to figure this out, but I need you both to promise me something. Promise me you'll be honest. With each other, with yourselves. Promise me you won't let fear make your decisions." "I promise," Natalia whispered. "Damien." I promise, grandfather. I promise. Thomas smiled, peaceful now. Good. That's all an old man can ask. His eyes drifted closed, his breathing becoming more labored. The hospice nurse stepped forward, checking monitors, adjusting medications. He needs rest, she said gently. You can stay, but he might not wake again today. They stayed. Hours blurred together as sunlight tracked across the floor. Machines beeped their steady rhythm, and Thomas Blackwood's breathing grew shallower. Evelyn brought them tea they didn't drink. Nurses came and went with sympathetic smiles. As evening settled over the estate, Damien and Natalia sat on either side of the bed, hands still clasped over Thomas's chest. He'd orchestrated this final scene too, she realized, forcing them together in grief, in honesty, in a moment too real for pretense. I'm scared, Damien said suddenly, voice raw, of what I feel for you, of losing you, of losing him, all of it. I'm scared too, Natalia admitted. I came here for money. I convinced myself it was just a transaction. But then you were kind to me, and protective, and broken in ways I understood. And now, I don't know if I can walk away in 6 months. Even if the money disappears, you shouldn't have to. He looked at her across the bed, across the old man who'd brought them together through manipulation and hope. I don't want you to walk away. I want you to stay for real. No contract, no timeline, just us figuring out if this thing between us is as real as it feels. What about the money? The clause says, I don't care what the clause says. You need financial security. I'll give it to you, contract or no contract. You need independence. We'll figure that out too. But I can't, his voice broke. I can't pretend anymore that this is business. It stopped being business the moment I saw you sitting on your apartment floor, surrounded by bills, trying so hard to be strong when everything was falling apart. It stopped being business when you defended me to my mother without hesitation. It stopped being business when you kissed me back. Natalia's tears finally fell, hot and cleansing. I don't know how to be your real wife. I barely know you. Then we'll learn. Together, isn't that what marriage is supposed to be? Not a contract, but a choice you make every day. Thomas's breathing changed, became more peaceful, almost like a sigh. The nurse checked his pulse and nodded gently. He was slipping away, his mission accomplished. His last wish granted in the most unexpected way. Natalia stood and moved around the bed, sliding into Damien's lap, wrapping her arms around him as he buried his face in her shoulder. They held each other as Thomas left the world, their tears mingling, their hearts breaking and healing simultaneously. 6 months later, Natalia stood in the same penthouse, but everything was different. The space no longer felt like a museum. Her artwork hung on the walls now, her books shared shelf space with his. Her coffee mug sat permanently beside his on the counter. The guest room had become her design studio, where she'd rebuilt her career with Damien's support, both financial and emotional. They'd torn up the contract in a small ceremony, just the two of them and a fireplace, watching the pages curl and burn. Then they'd gone to a courthouse and filled out real marriage papers, the kind that didn't have hidden clauses or exit strategies. Today marked what would have been their 6-month anniversary if they'd stuck to the original plan. Instead, it marked 6 months since Thomas's death, 6 months since they'd chosen each other for real. Hey, Damien emerged from his office, loosening his tie. How was your meeting with the new client? Good. Really good, actually. They want me to design the entire brand identity for their startup. She turned from the window where she'd been watching the city. How was your day? Long, tedious board meeting about quarterly projections. He crossed to her, sliding his arms around her waist in a gesture that had become automatic, necessary. But I kept thinking about tonight. Our non-anniversary anniversary. Something like that. Pulled back slightly to look at her. I have something for you. He produced a small box from his pocket, and Natalia's heart stuttered. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant. Nothing like the enormous diamond he'd bought for their fake engagement. Before you panic, it's not another proposal. We're already married, he smiled, that genuine smile that transformed his entire face. But I never gave you something that represented the real thing. This is for the woman I chose, not the one I hired. For the woman who saw past my walls and decided to stay anyway, Natalia took the ring with trembling hands, letting him slide it onto her finger beside the flashy fake engagement ring she'd never been able to take off. It's perfect. You're perfect. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. Well, not perfect. You leave your design sketches everywhere. You sing off-key in the shower. And you somehow use every dish in the kitchen to make a sandwich. You work too much. You're impossible to shop for, and you brood like it's an Olympic sport. Match made in heaven. Clearly they laughed together, and it was easy, natural. Nothing like the careful navigation of those first days. Natalia thought about the woman who'd signed that contract, desperate and drowning, seeing only an escape route. She could never have imagined this. Real love growing from artificial roots, a relationship built on deception that became the most honest thing in her life. Do you ever regret it? Damien asked suddenly. Signing without reading the fine print? Natalia pretended to consider. Well, I did end up trapped in a marriage with a workaholic billionaire who thinks breakfast is optional and owns exactly one pair of jeans. That's not an answer. Standing on tiptoe to kiss him properly? I regret nothing. That hidden clause, your grandfather's meddling, the terrible family dinner, all of it led here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Even without the $1 million. She'd given most of it away, actually. Paid off her mother's medical debts. Set up a fund for other families drowning in healthcare costs. Donated to causes that mattered. Kept enough to start her business and build security, but money had stopped being the point somewhere along the way. Even without the $1 million, she confirmed. Turns out some things can't be bought. Like the way you bring me coffee exactly how I like it without being asked. Or how you argue with me about design concepts because you actually care about my work. Or the way you still get nightmares about losing people you love, and you're finally letting me help you through them. Damien pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. Outside, the city sparkled with possibility. Millions of stories unfolding in windows and streets and hearts brave enough to take chances. Oh, Thomas would be smug as hell about this, he murmured. Oh, absolutely. He probably planned the whole thing from the beginning. Manipulative old man. We loved him anyway. Yeah, Damien agreed softly. We did. They stood there as evening deepened. Two people who'd agreed to pretend for 6 months and ended up discovering something real. The contract that brought them together had burned to ash. But what remained was stronger than any legal document. A choice made daily. A commitment earned through honesty. A love that survived because they'd both been brave enough to stop protecting themselves from feeling. Somewhere. Natalia imagined Thomas Blackwood was smiling, satisfied with his final masterpiece. He'd seen past their deceptions to the truth underneath, and he'd given them the push they needed to see it too. His last gift wasn't the money, or the clause, or even the marriage arrangement itself. It was belief. Belief that two broken people could heal each other. Belief that real love was worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth choosing over safety and certainty. And in the end, he'd been right.